Parshas Chukas has many, many powerful narratives. The first part is talking about the chapter. Chapter 19 is the passage of the red heifer, the purification process. And that's a passage we're not going to talk about now because that's the passage that we typically talk about on Parshas Parah. In preparation for Pesach, we read about Parshas Parah, which talks about the purification if a person came in contact with a dead body. Right after this passage of the Parshas Parah, we read the very next passage is about the death of Miriam. The death of Miriam. And then after the death of Miriam, we read about the people not having any water. People not having any water in their wells. So they cry out to Moshe and they say, give us water. And then we see the passage where Moshe is told by God to speak to the rock, but instead he hits the rock twice, and he yells at the people. And God brings forth water from the rock. But then God says to Moshe, because you did not sanctify me, therefore you're not going to be able to go out from the land of, you're not going to be able to go into the land of Israel. And then the next passage is where we talk about the Canaanite, that the Jewish people were under attack. Well, actually, first we talk about Aaron dying. And then after Aaron dies on Hor Hahar, that mountain, then after Aaron's death, the Jewish people are attacked. According to the literal verse, it says they're attacked by Canaani. Marad, she says they're attacked by the Amalekites. Okay, so this is the arc of the portion. The question is, let's go to the passage of Miriam and talk about the death of Miriam. Why is the death of Miriam next to the red heifer? And also the very big question here, which everybody really spends a lot of time on, why is it that Moshe hits the rock twice? And for this, right after that, it's told he doesn't go into the land of Israel. Is this a punishment that fits the crime, so to speak? It seems like it's too much. So let's just look at the beginning of chapter 20, talk about the death of Miriam. And then I'd like to talk about what Rabbi Soloveitchik has. He has a very powerful insights into this passage. Vayavo b'nei Yisrael, chapter 20, verse 1. The children of Israel came with the whole congregation to Midbar Tzin, to the Tzin wilderness. B'chodesh harishon, in the first month. Vayeshev am b'Kadesh. And the people settled in Kadesh. V'tamasha Miriam, and Miriam died there, Vatikaver Sham, and she was buried there. Now the passage doesn't tell us what year. It says in the first month, the month of Nisan, but it doesn't tell us what year. So when did this take place? So this place, it makes it sound like it's right after the rebellion of Korach. But Rabbi Soloveitchik, and we'll read him inside, he says, this is in the 40th year. There was a gap of 38 years. The Torah doesn't tell us, fast forward 38 years, but that's exactly what goes on here. The 38 missing years occur here, and Miriam dies there. Why does Miriam die there? Rashi tells us, why is the death of Miriam placed next to the passage of the red heifer? To tell you that just like the sacrifices serve as an atonement for the people, so too the death of the righteous serves as an atonement. So, and then immediately after Miriam dies, there was no water for the congregation, and the people gathered on Moses and Aaron, and they strove against Moses. And they said, we should have perished with our brothers before God. They said we should have perished with the previous generation. It says, why did you bring this community to this wilderness to die there, us and our flock? Why did you take us out of Egypt to bring us to this terrible place? It's not a place that has anything growing. There's no figs, grapes, pomegranates. There's no water to drink. And Moshe and Aaron come before the community to the entrance and they fall on their faces. So at first glance, this seems like it's more of the same of what's going on. But of course, it's completely different because now this is 38 years later. So it's a totally different group of people speaking. Everybody from the previous generation who's had these complaints has died out. And now the people who are coming to Moshe, they're saying, what have you done for us lately? Okay, sure, you led us for the last 40 years in the wilderness, but what are you doing today for us? Now we don't have water. And by the way, it says after Aaron and Moses die, it says that the people mourned for Aaron and Moses. But here it doesn't even say that the people mourned for Miriam. They didn't even give Moshe time to mourn. And the next thing we know, they're jumping on top of him and saying, where's our water? Why did you bring us out to this place? It's not fair what you're doing to us. So this is the passage of Miriam. And I want to read to you. Well, let me just pause for a moment, see if anybody has any questions before I read to you what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. Hold on one second. Okay, so let's see what Rabbi Soloveitchik says about the death of Miriam and the sin and Moses, why Moses is not allowed to enter into the land. It's a very sad, and I have a hard, I really moved by the way Rabbi Soloveitchik writes here. So, especially about why Moses was not able to go in. Maybe I think he was writing autobiographically. So first he says, why is the death of Miriam placed next to the passage of the red heifer? So the Rabbi Soloveitchik says, why is the chapter of the Parah Aduma, i.e. the red heifer, situated in this portion? So really the ideal place would have been in the other places where we talk about ritual impurity, in Shemini, in Tazria, Mitzorah, and Leviticus. So he says we want to say it's more severe, but why isn't it Bamidbar in this book? And it's really, in this parasha Chukas, it's completely out of place. The rest of the portion is talking about narratives, about incidents that happened. All of a sudden we have this passage of the red heifer. So this is what he writes. The chapter of the red heifer is a bridge spanning events that happened 38 years apart. 38 years apart. Okay. 38 years apart. It's spanning. And from the rebellion of Korach to the arrival at the wilderness of Sin, meaning to say we're missing 38 years. It's a somber reflection of those tragic years during which those who left Egypt were dying in the desert and making their way for the generation of the desert. So the Yotzei Mitzrayim, those who left Egypt, were dying, and the generation of the wilderness to enter in. So the passage is here, says Rabbi Soloveitchik. It's such a simple idea, but I never saw anybody else say it. But it's so simple to reflect that this was the death of the entire generation. That's why this passage of Parah Aduma appears here. This is the segue to show everybody else has died out. Everybody else is dead now, except for Moses and Aaron. So Moses and Aaron were speaking to the children of the people they led out. All of a sudden, and they couldn't relate to them anymore. So that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. Korach's rebellion took place in the second year after the Exodus. The following 38 years, God turned his face, so to speak, from his people. Bnei Israel retreated, moving aimlessly without destination. It was a long, silent night without divine communication between God and Moses. No new mitzvos were given. The sun set for 38 years before the dialogue was resumed and the painful vigil came to an end. So Rabbi Soloveitchik says, what did they do? And the Gemara tells us the story that what did they do during those 38 years? So the Gemara tells us that every night, every year on Tisha B'Av, they would go out on the night of Tisha B'Av and dig a grave, and everybody would go into that grave, and in the morning Moshe would get up and declare that those who are living arise and separate themselves from the dead. Can you imagine what kind of Tisha B'Av that was? Everybody would go into the grave, and some people just wouldn't get out. That's what they did, and they did this for 38 consecutive years. What's the significance of this? Rabbi Soloveitchik says it's to tell us that life their life was no different from death. They basically died 38 consecutive times because a life without hope and anticipation is no different than death. So the entire generation realized they would never fulfill their dreams. They're going to end up in one of those graves. So it didn't matter if somebody survived 1 year. What's the difference? They were just walking aimlessly without any purpose. They spent 38 years in a state of separation from God. And this painful period, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, is like the Para Aduma. It's a divine decree beyond human comprehension. So, but the Para Aduma represents a triumph over death, an affirmation of life. So basically, what the Para Aduma passage is telling us is that we can be purified if we suspend our judgment and turn ourselves over to God. So this is why this is the transition period, telling us that there is a way forward, even though for these 38 years, the Jewish people were walking around aimlessly. That's what Rabbi Soloveitchik writes. I find it to be haunting how he talks about this silent night, this lack of communication, and this lack of understanding of and this lack of connection to God. And he gave this obviously in the shadow of the Holocaust, which I'm sure was affecting him every single day of his life. And he felt like this complete loss from this connection to Hashem, and through God turning his face, hiding his face during the years of the Shoah. Rabbi Soloveitchik's message is that there is a way forward. It's contained in the secret of the Para Aduma by simply surrendering to Hashem. That the answer forward is simple surrender to God. Simple surrender to God. In that context, I want to talk about the punishment of Moses. What did Moses do to be punished? So when we look at this verse, and the passage of Moses is also connected to the death of Miriam, because the Chazal say when Miriam died, the well stopped. They had no more water. And the reason is it's called Miriam's well. The well was there because of Miriam. So God spoke to Moses and he said, this is chapter 20, verse 7. So the people were complaining, they wanted water. And Hashem says, take this staff, gather the community, you and Aaron, your brother, speak to the rock in front of them. Let it give forth its water. They shall take forth water from the rock, and you'll give water to the community and to its flock. Moshe takes the staff from before God, just like he was commanded. And they gathered Moses and Aaron and the community at the rock. And he said to them, Shimuna hamorim, listen now, you morim. Morim, Rashi says, either means you wayward ones, it means you wayward ones, listen now. Or else it means, listen now, you fools, who you're trying to tell us what to do. Should we take water forth from this rock? And Moshe takes his stick and he hits the rock twice, and a lot of water came out and fed the community. So then the next verse, God says to Moses and Aaron, because you didn't sanctify me, therefore you're not going to lead the people into the land of Egypt, into the land of Canaan. What did Moshe do that didn't sanctify Hashem? So Rashi says, God told him to speak to the rock, and he hit the rock, which tells us that he deviated. It would have been a greater miracle if he had only spoken to the rock. If he had only spoken to the rock, it would have been a much greater miracle. Maimonides says the problem was, Nachmanides asked this question, why is it a greater miracle to get water from a rock by hitting it than by speaking? Why is it a greater miracle to get water from a rock by speaking than by hitting it? So Nachmanides and Maimonides say that the problem with Moses was that he struck the rock twice in anger, that he lost his temper, that by getting angry at the people, that showed that he lost his anger, and that was a terrible thing to do. I was also thinking that he says Shimuna Hamorim, but we could read that as Miriam, that he was saying, my sister just died. I'm in mourning. and I have to deal with you. He was in this tremendous sense of pain, and he couldn't. And they say, listen, he's saying like, have some sympathy for me. Have some sympathy for me. And I want to read what Rabbi Soloveitchik is saying, but first I want to take our question from Gray. Yes, Gray. This is what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, God says to Moses and Aaron, because you did not sanctify me in front of the eyes of Israel. Rabbi Soloveitchik says many theories have been advanced by our commentaries concerning Moshe's death, but none of the answers satisfy. In fact, whenever I study this passage with like political elected officials, all of them, a lot of them are really bothered by this because they say it's not fair. Moshe makes one mistake, like they've all, I'm sure, made mistakes. Who hasn't? And it seems like one mistake takes you down. So Rabbi Soloveitchik says it's humanly impossible to grasp the rationality of Moshe's death. Death in general and Moshe's belongs to the realm of Zos Chukas Torah. However, no matter what was the reason for Moshe's death, one basic truth stands out. Moshe suffers on account of Bnei Yisrael. There are 3 separate verses in the Tanakh that say that Bnei Yisrael was to blame for Moshe not entering the land of Israel. Moshe says that he cries out to God, V'ayetchananu Hashem. But Moshe says Hashem was angry on account of you. Hashem says to me, neither will you go there because of you, on account of you. In Tehillim, we read, they provoked God by the waters of Merivah, and Moshe suffered because of them. Meaning to say, it was because of the Jewish people. Like we're flipping it here. It was not the fault of the Jewish people that Moshe made a mistake. Yeah, he made his own mistake. But had the people possessed, this is just so sad, had they possessed a sensitivity and love for Moshe, similar to the love that Moshe felt for them, they would have torn the decree into shreds. How come nobody's crying out for Moshe to be allowed in? When this is like the question I asked last week, how come nobody stood up for Moshe against Korach? How come nobody cried out for Moshe to be allowed to go into the land of Israel? None of the people cried out for them. When the people were punished, when the people were warned by God, Moshe cries out on behalf of the people. But now, nobody's crying out on behalf of Moshe. When he was told that he would not enter the land of Israel, Moshe pleaded for forgiveness. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, had the people joined him in prayer, Hashem would have been forced to respond. But they did not join. Thus we read that with tears in his eyes, Moshe told them, I cried out to God at that time, saying, pray, let me cross over and see the good land that's on the other side of the Jordan. In my request for Hashem to rescind his decree and allow me to enter into Israel, I prayed alone. I prayed. Where was everybody else praying with Moshe? Where was everybody else praying with Moshe? I prayed, no one else joined in with me. But God became angry and did not listen to me on your account. What a such a sad passage. And here you see Moshe Rabbeinu praying, begging God to be able to go in. And he has to pray by himself. Where was the Tehillim rallies? Everybody gathering for Moshe Rabbeinu to go in. Nothing. That's what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. Rabbi Soloveitchik was like the leader of so many people. I think he must have been lonely when he wrote this. He must have been saying, how come there's nobody helping me at this time? I imagine that's what Rabbi Soloveitchik, he had many thousands of students, but he must have been very lonely. Especially after his wife died, his whole life changed. Must have been incredibly lonely to be able to write those words. Yes, I see Richard is raising his hand patiently. Yes, Richard. I want to continue with one more source, which to me is the powerful source of the Dudai Ruvain. The Dudai Ruvain, Rabbi Reuven Katz, he says as follows. he said that kind of like what we just heard from Gray, that this is the arc of the story. Moshe's time had come. And there's 3 paragraphs that tell this. He says, a leader is responsible to influence the people. The leader is responsible to lead the people in the true path. And so until the people understand that they cannot violate God at all. He says, if this leader is not able to influence the people, so as a result of this, the people end up becoming punished by not walking down the path of the Torah. Whose fault is it? So then the leader himself is responsible to be placed together with the people according to the punishment that's placed upon them. And therefore he needs to receive the consequences, whatever is going to happen to the people. You're right. Moshe Rabbeinu if Moshe Rabbeinu didn't succeed to lift up these people to the spiritual level that they're worthy to enter into the land, and they became decreed to die in the wilderness, so too Moses should not merit to enter into the land. Together with the people, he's responsible to die in the wilderness, to remain in the wilderness. He says, we find this in the Midrash Rabbah. Because you didn't sanctify me, God says to Moshe, under what circumstances do you want to go into the land? You have no right. You have no standing to be able to enter into the land. It's like a shepherd. He went out to graze his flock, the flock of the king, and the sheep were captured. So the shepherd now comes back and says, I want to go back into the palace. The king says, if you come in now, what are people going to say? They're going to think you captured the sheep. So God says to Moses, we're going to praise you that you took 600. If you took out 600,000 people, is it a praise to you that you bury them in the wilderness and then you bring in another generation? That's no benefit to you. You had the people out of the land, buried them, and then took a whole new people into the land of Canaan. That's no praise to you. That's a tremendous insult to you. It's like if you have the captain of the Titanic, if he alone survived, what do you think people would say about that captain? Terrible things. He abandoned his ship. There's no way Moshe Rabbeinu could have entered in. Once the people were decreed that they can't enter in, there's no way, as Gray pointed out before, what the Dudai Ruvain saying, there's no way Moshe Rabbeinu could have gone in and he took out a whole people who died. He had to die along with them. The tragic fate of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address.